Psychology.
Yeah, the computer.
We tried.
Yeah, I know.
So we all agree that he has a breakdown of all of them out.
We're finding out just to find out it's an experiment. Once we find out it's not an experiment, we're leaving. Like,
FYI, unplugging the computer
Yeah.
does not always work.
Strike one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You know, I.
It didn't work.
Oh, here, have you tried unplugging it?
We did. It didn't work.
I just don't think technology likes you.
No, last time the computer was working.
Really? Well, then it's already tech. They're from the pressure broken from the water.
Yeah. Nothing like being told, you know, don't pee when you get to school.
It was on the second floor according to them.
It was
No,
both
it's down here too.
Now it's everywhere. Yeah.
It's everywhere. Yeah, just if you go in the bathroom, just obviously don't walk into the bathroom that says on board. Says some of them are working, hopefully working. So.
Hopefully working. I like the optimism.
That's what she told me. I was like, well, okay, I guess I'm making it try. I come back out and go, sorry, broke it.
Not broken. I killed it.
Go away. There we go.
I found one of the most pointless classes that Ivy Tech mandates you to do. Actually, two.
IBTY 105.
Which one's that?
Freshman sim, basically.
Oh,
No, that's 101. 105 is financial literacy.
I took this one. It was.
The freshman one was pointless because if you're anyone coming straight out of high school, they should just make you not have to take it.
It'd be nice and all, but
Not just anyone comes in with a high school transcript within a year, 2 years, with like common sense saying, we kind of know the stuff that's in that class. And for health careers, if you're already in it, intro to health careers is pointless.
Yeah, I take that one. I actually took that one. For health careers? No, I took it in classes.
I'm
My
taking
teacher left 2 weeks before class, and the new teacher that came in was like, none of your assignments were turned in properly. We're like, what are you talking about? She told us not to do these. No, they're all due. So we had like 4 weeks before that. It's 4 weeks to catch up on everything. Has everything. And I had her in 2 of my classes that were both on mine.
What did you have?
37. I don't know. It was like a front point.
I had Laura Flynn.
It's a stupid class. It's nothing what you need to know. I mean, it's all the classes we're going to be taking anyways to go to a health care.
Yeah, like our final project is you research 2 professions.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Ours was like, and then our teacher told us, oh, we only need to research one, so we only researched one, and then when the new teacher came in, she was like, no, you need to do both for one.
Yeah. But that's not till later.
I'm glad you're done with my class. There's a lot of stupid classes that
I haven't found more than 2 right now.
And that's
Medical law because I see some. I don't like the teacher. I
Quantitative
don't like the teacher that I had because she keeps changing things
I don't know if it's math.
and not notifying me. Hey, the schedule's changed. I gotta look at it. But it's in our policy that
they can't, but they should be able to know, they should notify you at least as per.
makes me always feel everyone there is. But that's just my opinion of it. Yay, personality. Things some of us don't have.
I don't know, some people I think they do have it, not in this class.
all right. Go ahead and get started. Yesterday I was doing my lecture for 101 and looked at the calendar and realized, holy cow, the finals are next week, which this semester kind of flew by. So we're down to just a couple more lectures. And so there's a few that I really want to hit on. There's 3 topics that basically I feel like if we don't hit these, then we've kind of missed the boat. One of them being personality disorders, one being schizophrenia, and one being mood disorders. So that's going to be the schedule for Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday. We'll hit one of those per night. Then you will have exam number 3 will be opening up online. It's going to be another one just like the one you had for exam number 2. And the final exam will be next Thursday. Okay, so obviously we'll be reviewing. And the final exam will cover anxiety, suicide, personality disorders, schizophrenia, and mood disorders.
So what was the exam that was supposed to that?
That's going to be exam number 3.
Okay, that was.
That's going to be number 3.
Are we taking the final in class?
Yes. Maybe. Yes.
So what day is the final? I've got it on here that it's on the 28th.
Yes, that is Thursday, correct? Yeah, I know the 29th is Friday, so yes, it is the 28th.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Today's the 19th.
Yeah.
Yep.
It came up fast.
Yeah.
It did.
Jesus, okay.
And, okay, so I've told you all along that the final is going to be in class. It may or may not. That's as good as I can tell you right now. If it isn't in class, it's going to be, obviously it's going to be online. I will know by Wednesday whether or not it's going to be in class or not. Either way, you're going to be allowed to use at least some notes on your final, and I'll be giving you a study guide of some kind. Okay, so just keep your ears open. I'll let you know by Wednesday or Thursday of this, so tomorrow or Thursday, how that's going to go. Okay.
Just as long as the study guide isn't like human sexuality study guide. We made our own study guide.
Oh yeah, I couldn't remember what I did for that. Yeah, you made your own study guide. That was pretty awesome, at least on my end. Maybe not for you guys.
Nothing was on it. That was.
It's on our study guide.
Again, you guys did a poor job. Okay.
Seemed like a question.
Personality disorders. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. And to me, these are the most interesting of the disorders that we're going to talk about through the entire semester. Not because they're the most prevalent, not because they're the most problematic, but because they're the ones that most people can identify with on a personal level. There are 10 personality disorders, and by the end of the night, I will guarantee that most of you will be somewhere between 3 and 6 of self-diagnosis. You will be telling yourself, oh crap, I have this one. Oh crap, I have this one. Oh crap, I have this one. And let me just give you kind of a couple of things to maybe decrease your anxiety about that. First off, the prevalence rate for people who actually have personality disorders is really low. It's below 5% for all the personality disorders. So the chances of you actually having one of these personality disorders is rare. The other thing is we have to go back to the very first day of class. We have to go back to the 4 Ds: deviance, danger, dysfunction, and thank you, distress. If you're seeing that you fit, or even better, someone you know fits, that's going to happen on a lot. It's like, oh, I know somebody who has that, I know somebody who has that. You have to remember, just because somebody is presenting with symptoms does not mean that they actually have a psychiatric disorder. Very much to the contrary, if it's not causing any dysfunction, if it's not causing any significant clinical distress, if it's not dangerous, it's not a psychiatric disorder. One of the disorders that we'll talk about quite a bit, because it's kind of the granddaddy of all personality disorders, which is borderline personality disorder. It can appear as though 3/4 of the people in the world could have this disorder. And at any given time, I would say about 99% of people could have it sometime throughout the year. But you have to remember that this is a pattern of a person's entire life. It's not just happening in one situation and going away. These are an individual's personality. So we have to go back to Psych 101 and we have to remember what is a personality. I'm going to have some lag here. This is not going to make me happy.
Back it up.
Yep.
Now, what did you guys do to this one?
Yeah, no, we didn't.
This one should be working. There we go.
Major life.
Okay. So what is personality? Personality is a set of characteristics that influence our behavior, emotions, thoughts, and interactions. It's a set of relatively static characteristics, meaning that over a long period of time, these are the characteristics that you exhibit in most situations. So if we look at the big five, if you base your personality on the big five, being extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, you would say that most of the time, you could probably identify most of the time whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Now, does that mean it's going to be that way all the time? No. You have what we call personas. And your persona is how you act in a certain situation. So right now you have the persona of a student, and I'm going to assume that your persona is different when you're out with your friends or when you're out with your family or when you're at work. Your persona is going to be significantly different. But the underlying piece of your personality is which is the one that you default to. And we use a concept called trait theory. And trait theory is I have certain traits about me that if you add those things up, it kind of makes who I am. Can I take those 10 or 15 traits and put them into a computer and create a personality that would be exactly like me? No, not at all. You can't create a virtual artificial intelligence version of you based upon a grouping of your personality traits, because you interact with people based upon emotions, based upon your personality, based upon the environment, based upon other things that are going on in your life, based upon your health. All these things are going to influence you in your day-to-day interactions. But the best way to think about personality is it's the way that you normally act, and if you run into somebody and they seem like, that if they were to walk away and say, wow, they're just not acting like themselves today. What they're expecting of you is your personality, if they know you pretty well, okay? So your personality is that distinct set of traits that allow us to be ourselves, but also allow us to adapt to new environments. Your personality is somewhat adaptable because if you had the same personality at all times, there would be times where you would be very out of place. If I'm going to assume that some of you may on the weekends go out and do things that if you were to come into class and do that for 3 hours, I would want you to leave. Okay? I would suspect that if I walked in to any other environment and just stood in the front of everybody and just started lecturing for 3 hours, probably wouldn't go real well, because most people don't want to listen to me for that long. So I don't have the authority to do so in certain situations. I can't just walk into a hospital and just start lecturing at people. I can't walk into an elevator and just hit the stop button and say, okay, guys, we're going to talk for 3 hours. Somebody is going to hit me and probably pull the button and we're going to go. So we're flexible, but the underlying piece is this is what my personality is, okay? So we take this concept of personality, and we apply it to psychopathology. And when we do that, when we look at personality and psychopathology, we come up with this notion or this concept of the personality disorder, okay? And the personality disorder is we take the definition of a personality, enduring rigid pattern of inner experiences, outward behavior, that impairs the sense of self, emotional experience, goals, capacity for empathy or intimacy. Essentially, it's 4 Ds to personality. That's the easiest definition for a personality disorder. When you being whatever entity you consider yourself to be, when there is a structural and functional problem with the being that is you, this is what we call a personality disorder. Okay? This is by far the hardest disorder to explain to someone that they have. Because with every other psychiatric disorder, you're saying there's this affliction. And depending on what model I use, either behaviorally you've adapted in a maladaptive way, you have a chemical imbalance if I'm using the medical model. Sociocultural, that means that your parents screwed you up or your society screwed you up. But it's this thing that we attach to you. It's like, I use the example of an albatross. It's the monkey on your back that we're going to treat and try to get off, okay? But with a personality disorder, there's no nice way to say this. Basically, we're saying there's something wrong with you as a person. Depression sucks. Having schizophrenia sucks. Having anxiety sucks, and we want to get rid of it. Personality disorder, you suck. And we're not going to try to get rid of it, because what would we do? Tell you to stop being you? Can't do that. So with a personality disorder, what we're telling you, if you have a personality disorder, is your personality is such that it's going to cause you dysfunction and danger and distress and deviance, and then kind of leave it at that. Because to get to the end of the whole story here, can we give you a pill to fix your personality? We can give you some drugs that might change your personality temporarily, but that's not legal on the psychiatric side, and it's not really effective because it's not changing your personality. Okay? So psychotherapy, it's questionable as to whether or not you should be dabbling with psychotherapy with somebody's personality. Because even though it might be dysfunctional, maybe it might be dangerous, who am I to sit back and say, you need to stop being you and you need to be somebody that I think that you should be, or that the DSM says that you should be? It's a very slippery slope, coupled with the fact that some of the personality disorders make it even harder to work with that individual, or for that individual to accept help, or the concept that another person might actually want to help somebody better their life. Narcissistic personality disorder. I don't have to tell you what that is for you to get in your mind. It's narcissist, somebody who thinks that they are great, right? So who am I to tell that person that they're not great, that their being, their personality sucks? Not only are they not going to accept that because they think their personality is great, they will have defense mechanisms in place to say, well, I'm great, who cares what that person thinks? If they don't see how great I am, then it's their problem. So there's all these conflicting issues that come with personality disorders. We don't diagnose. This is not a disorder that we see in childhood. And that comes with a big asterisk, like everything comes with a big asterisk. Personality disorders, we see them in children. We see them in adolescents, but we don't diagnose them in adolescence because damn near every teenager has a personality disorder. It's called being a teenager. Okay? If I diagnosed every single, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little bit misogynistic, but if I diagnosed every single teenage girl that came in, they would all have a personality disorder. And guess what? Eventually they don't. Guys too. They're different personality disorders. Usually you're looking at guys have narcissistic personality disorders, a little bit of histrionic personality disorders. Females as teenagers tend to be a little bit borderline, maybe a little histrionic, maybe a little bit attachment disorder. But there's still when you're a teenager, you're still developing who you're going to be. And it's not a personality disorder because there's no need for treatment. The minute we start to treat that personality, what's going to happen? Naturally, they're going to wake up tomorrow and be a totally different person. So we only start to diagnose, we only start to treat the personality disorder when the personality is pretty well fully formed. There's this arbitrary notion in the Western world that 18 is the magic number. Is anybody's personality truly formed at 18? Did anybody turn 18 and like, ta-da, like the clouds parted and you became an adult? No. You know, the only thing that changed is you were doing things now legally that the day before you were doing illegally, like when you turned 21. You know, the only difference is now you can use your own ID. And that's really about the only difference. I mean, you don't turn into adult, you don't become more responsible just because, you know, it turned from one day to the next. So with these personality disorders, we're talking about the fact that the personality is set and they're incredibly difficult to treat. I've already talked about the fact that A lot of times people may not even be aware that there's a personality problem because of defense mechanisms. If you consistently have trouble in your job or your interpersonal relationships or interactions with authority, do most people immediately think, wow, there's something wrong with me? No. The first thing we intuitively think is,
There's something wrong with
there's
this.
something wrong with everybody else. And I try to stay away from politics as much as possible. But when we look at young, politically minded people, they tend to blame everybody but themselves. You know, if you ask a kid who got caught shoplifting, I'm really big on verbiage. And when I used to work with kids, most of them came through the criminal justice system. And the verbiage that they would use was very telling about their locus of control. It wasn't, nobody ever said, I got caught shoplifting. It was, they arrested me for shoplifting. Okay? It's verbiage, it's very small, but saying they got me, they arrested me, means that I'm not taking the ownership of the event as much. Now, does that stop in adulthood? Do adulthood's like every adult, like when they get caught, like, oh yeah, I murdered my wife, that was me, sorry. No, but it's just the way that we communicate indicates that in adolescence especially, we don't tend to take ownership of our actions. And so a lot of times we don't even know that the problem is our problem. And while most of you do not have a personality disorder, just by statistics, 9 to 13 of adults have a personality disorder, the bigger issue is, even if we knew that 10% of people had a personality disorder, it's not an easy treatment. And even if you have a personality disorder, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a significant dysfunction. You can be distressed, you can be somewhat dangerous to yourself or to people around you just because of the emotional trauma you bring. You may be dysfunctional, but because it is part of your personality, you don't realize it and you don't care. Okay? If you are, again, I'm going to stick on borderline because borderline is, it's very much like bipolar. As a matter of fact, it's oftentimes misdiagnosed as bipolar. Because people with borderline personality disorder tend to live their life in a very black and white mentality. People are good, people are bad. And it's very transient. You can be good right now, but if you cross me, you become bad. It's not good people doing bad things and bad people doing good things, and we can see the gray in everything. It's very comic bookish. It's like we have the bad guys and the good guys, and that's all there is. Okay? So if I live my life in that way, once someone has crossed me, once somebody has gone over to the bad side, I don't see a need to bring that person back into my life because they are irrelevant to me. They're inconsequential. And if somebody is good in my life, if they don't reciprocate that, what is the borderline person probably going to do? They're going to take that good person and reallocate them over to the bad side. Because I like you. Oh, you don't reciprocate that? You don't like me? Well, you suck. Now you're on the bad side, and I don't even need to worry about you. So it's a lot of people will argue that things like that, if you were a Freudian-minded person, you would look at that and you would say, that's a defense mechanism gone amok. That I'm going to protect myself by putting you into a category that I don't feel like I need you around me, and that really doesn't work for most people, but it works if you believe it's going to work. And so you're going to hear a lot of these circular logics as we talk about these. Okay? It's very common for a person with a personality disorder to suffer from another disorder. That's comorbidity. We talked about that, I think, week 1 or week 2. A lot of times you will see multiple personality disorders, not multiple personality disorder, but multiple, 2 or more personality disorders at a given time. You will oftentimes see personality disorders with mood disorders. You will oftentimes see certain personality disorders with anxiety disorders. And there are some, like avoidant and attachment-based personality disorders, where anxiety is almost a must. You have to have anxiety because that's what's moving you away or towards the person that you're attaching to. When we switched from DSM-4 to DSM-5, there was talk of really shaking up the personality disorders. They were talking about taking some out, adding some in, recategorizing them, and in the end, they didn't do a whole lot. They kind of recategorized them just a little bit, but for the most part, if you learned about personality disorders before, if you read about them in DSM-4 or in your 101 class, we're still about the same thing. We don't have to relearn or unlearn anything. We have the three clusters. We used to call them A, B, and C. Now they've taken the names, taken out cluster A, B, and C, and now they just call them what they are. Okay, so the first category is the odd or eccentric behaviors. Okay, and this is paranoid, schizoid, schizotypal. What's really interesting about these is that they are oftentimes miscategorized for, obviously, I mean, if there's one thing just based upon the words up there, what diagnosis might it be confused with? Schizophrenia. Yeah, and what's interesting is schizotypal really doesn't have anything to do with schizophrenia, not even close. Most people who have either schizoid or schizotypal personality disorders are people who, back in DSM-4, were probably undiagnosed people with Asperger's, because schizoid and schizotypal are varying degrees of antisocial, not antisocial as in antisocial personality disorder. So we're going to talk in circles here a little bit. Antisocial meaning not social, not interactive. Okay. Second group, and these are the hardest of the hard diagnoses to work with: the dramatic, emotional, and erratic behavior. Antisocial, borderline, narcissistic, histrionic. Borderline and histrionic are kind of kissing cousins. They're very similar. A lot of times we'll see a lot of overlap between the two. Narcissistic is basically what it is. It is what it is. It's a person who irrationally believes that they are far better than either what they actually are, which is it's subjective, so you can't really say that. But there's a dysfunction in how great they think they are. Okay, and it's not explained by psychosis, because if you have a delusion of grandeur, like if I was struck, I woke up this morning and the clouds parted, and I believe that God said, "Hey, Brad, you're up. You're God now. I'm going to take a vacation." That's I can't even fix the computer, so it's not happening. But that would be, I would assume that is somewhat psychotic. I think. If I did not believe that was psychotic, that probably fits right along the lines with narcissistic. Like if I were to believe, like, hey, yeah, God, finally, tagging me in. Okay, that's probably narcissistic and psychotic together. It can happen. Antisocial. Again, I've already used that word to try not to confuse you, but it fits in with schizoid and schizotypal. But when we're talking about antisocial personality disorder, we're not talking about somebody who is awkward. Antisocial personality disorder is best described by the term that we use in common language, which is a psychopath. Antisocial personality disorder, psychopath. Okay? And then finally, the anxious and fearful. If you're going to have one, if you're going to have a personality disorder, it probably is going to be one of these. Avoidant, dependent, is kind of just different sides of the same coin. And then one that tends to confuse the heck out of people. Obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. We've already talked about something that sounds really similar to that, right? OCD. Obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, if you have ever met somebody who is sitting there and they're organizing their purse or they're going through their folders and they're making sure that everything's in the right order and they go, oh my God, I'm so OCD. They're probably not OCD, okay? They're probably nothing, but statistically they're nothing. But if they are anything, they're probably obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, meaning that they have this overriding need to be orderly. And when they are orderly, they feel better about the situation. So if you remember, obsessive-compulsive disorder is I'm obsessive about something that is usually irrational, and so I do a behavior, my compulsive behavior, my compulsion, to get rid of that anxiety. With OCPD, it's more like I feel better when my life is orderly, and I go beyond what normal people would think about orderly. Everything in my life is complete order. When you look at, I've a couple family members who are ex-Marines. I have one who's an old drill sergeant. I would never categorize him as OCPD, but if I wanted to videotape somebody and say, this is what OCPD probably looks like, this is the guy. Everything in its place, all his closets everything is pressed perfectly, everything's in perfect order, it's color coordinated, the shoes are lined up, the socks don't touch the underwear in the drawer, they're lined up perfectly. When he sets the food out, his plate looks like it should be in a picture, he's got the silverware lined up, and it's not debilitating for him. He just spent 25 years being completely orderly. Military kind of puts that into you. And so I'm not going to say that it's a personality disorder. I would just say he's kind of an obsessive-compulsive personality. And that's why we can use some of these terms to just identify people without saying it's a disorder. I can say to somebody, man, you are kind of narcissistic. And that doesn't mean that they have a personality disorder. It just means that they think their stuff doesn't stink. And if that doesn't really cause them a problem, then it's not a personality disorder. Narcissistic personality, and again, I'll go over all these individually, but if you think about something like narcissistic personality disorder, there are two people in the United States today who are completely narcissistic. They are the two most narcissistic people, and I'm not saying that as a judgment on them, but I would say that if I were going to put the two most narcissistic people in the world, in the United States today, who am I talking about? Trump and Clinton. Not because I don't like either of them, not because I disagree or I agree, but these are two people who believe there are 300 million people and I am the one. I will lead you all, okay? Don't you have to be a little bit narcissistic to believe that? Yeah. Think about great CEOs, great coaches. I've never met a great business leader or a great coach who's like, yeah, we're pretty good. My team's okay. I'm a pretty good coach. I mean, if you look at like the NFL, most people hate. Is anybody here a Patriots fan? If you watch the NFL, most people hate, and I can kind of say this because we're in Colts and Bear country, hate Bill Belichick, Patriots coach. He comes across as just a narcissistic, curmudgeon-y old prick, and that's the nice way of putting it. But his teams do one thing really well. Thank you. I knew somebody would say. They cheat, but they also win. Okay? UFC, MMA, if anybody watched UFC 200, kind of the biggest name that kind of came back, and if you watch WWE, you also know this name, Brock Lesnar. People either really like him or really hate him because he's narcissistic. He is the quintessential alpha male. He's a 300-pound, probably 5% body fat, just behemoth, almost Neanderthal-looking guy who likes to hit people. Okay? And he gets into a cage, and he allows people to lock the cage with him with another 300-pound dude, and he believes that he's going to walk out of there with his senses. You have to be a little narcissistic to do that, right? Is that a bad thing? No. It's needed in certain situations. And so I wouldn't say that's a personality disorder. Muhammad Ali, back in his time, was completely narcissistic. And it worked for him. Okay? So business leaders, great people in history, any great person that you look at throughout history probably had some narcissism to them. And the ones that fell, the ones that kind of screwed up, are the ones that you might argue maybe had a personality disorder. Nixon. Nixon may have had a personality disorder because he was so narcissistic that he really thought that he was above everything and kind of screwed himself over. CEOs, Bernie Madoff. Anybody, if you ever watched the CNBC show American Greed, has anybody ever watched that show before? It's really interesting. It's just about business people who kind of go too far. Like, yeah, if I'm a doctor, I can write down that that session lasted 45 minutes, but it only lasted 20 minutes. Oh, look at that, I just doubled my billing for the day. And then, you know what, I tested that person for the cold, I'm going to say that I gave them a triple bypass surgery. And all of a sudden, you're bringing in millions of dollars a year in false insurance, and that's kind of the narcissistic personality disorder where I believe that I'm above the law, I believe that I won't get caught. So these are the 10, and we'll kind of break down. There's some of them that we'll go over very quickly, and some of them that we'll go over a little bit more in depth. So let's start. I'm going to skip through some of these. And we'll start with the odd category. The odd personality disorders really starts with the notion that there is a socially acceptable personality or norm, and to deviate from that is somewhat problematic. It's somewhat abnormal, okay? And so with these odd personality disorders, the person will normally not identify that there's something wrong with them, but other people will be able to identify for them. And this is one of the groupings of disorders that we tend to only see in the clinical realm when they're referred in for a specific reason. And I would say, I don't have any scientific data to say that this is where most people come from, but in my anecdotes, most people with these odd personality disorders only get into the clinic when they're sent in by I can't think of the acronym. It's not OEP. EAP, Employee Assistance Program. Somebody is working and people are complaining that they're not interacting appropriately, they're hindering other people's work, and so they get sent in to figure out what's going on with that person. So it's not the same as schizophrenia. It's not psychotic. But from an outsider's perspective, you kind of wonder when you're looking like, do you really know what you're saying? Do you really understand that what you are saying is way bizarre? Okay? And so a lot of times these people will look like one of three things. They can look like they have schizophrenia, that they're talking about something so passionately and so factual when it's something subjective, like politics. They're so factual that they know the truth about what, either Hillary or Trump or whoever, what the real agenda is, that you start to think, man, is this person on the same plane that I am? That's one case. Or it could be the personality disorder, which would explain it. Or it could be, and we're seeing more of this where people start to question, are you autistic? Do you not see the world as I see the world? Not because you're psychotic, not because you're a personality disorder, but do you have some type of neurological developmental disorder to where you're not seeing things, where you're not talking the same language? Okay? What happens is that the person will have specific symptoms that lead us to wondering if they have a personality disorder. And the personality disorder is kind of the rule out. Once we've ruled out that the person is not schizophrenic, they're not delusional, and once we realize that they are cognitively aware, the only thing we can say is if they're having distress because of their personality, it therefore must be a personality disorder. And what we see it manifest as the person becomes isolated. Does the person always care that they're isolated? No, sometimes they really like it. And so a lot of times these people will have a personality disorder, they'll have all the criteria, they'll never get diagnosed, they'll never be treated, and for all intents and purposes, they don't need to be treated. Because a lot of people with these personality disorders, because their personality is such, they will create a life that makes sense for them. They will enter into a job that allows their personality disorder or their personality quirk to work for them. Okay? A lot of times they'll have isolated jobs, computer programmers. You might have to work with a team, but you can be working on your own, and you don't have to interact with people. And so they set up their life to actually work for them because of, or in lieu of the fact that they have this personality disorder. Okay, we as clinicians know that simply telling somebody that you have a personality disorder is both very difficult and also counterproductive. Because a person with especially these odd personality disorders, they don't normally seek out treatment. And so they don't really care about social norms. They don't care if a clinician is telling them that something is wrong with them. And especially with schizoid, they could care less. Okay? So the first one is paranoid personality disorder. And it's basically extreme suspiciousness based upon a person's personality. It's not because they are psychotic. It's not because I believe that people can read my thoughts and they can implant thoughts into my head, and therefore I'm paranoid to be around people and I must wear a tinfoil hat. That's schizophrenia. Okay? These are individuals who just don't trust anybody because it's part of who they are. And we're seeing this become a much more normal phenomenon in culture, to the point where this was one of the disorders in DSM-5 that there was consideration of taking out. Because there are some situations where 10 years ago, if you were to profess a belief about something, people would say, you're crazy, you're paranoid. But today we know that there's some validity to that. Anybody here put a sticky note over their camera of their computer? Anybody who put a piece of paper over it?
I think my boyfriend did that now.
Okay.
It would like randomly just turn on, and I got freaked out. I used to leave my computer open all the time, so I took it. It wasn't a post note, but I took a business card and saved it on there.
Yeah.
And rebooted the entire thing. Now I don't know.
If you walk around, as in the next couple of days, just walk around and look at people's laptops. You will see more people with little triangles, little wedges over their camera, little pieces of sticky over their cameras. And if you were to ask people 5 or 6 years ago, are you worried about somebody watching you through your camera on your laptop? Most people are like, no. Like, why would they want to watch me? Basically, they're just looking at my face. How much fun is that? But today, we know that people do go in there for fun, and a lot of times they'll go and they'll try to unlock as many webcams as they can, trying to find one of two things: either somebody interesting or somebody doing something interesting in front of the camera. 5 years ago, if I would have said, "Hey, you need to be careful about what you store in your iPhone because if it goes up into the iCloud, somebody can grab it." Well, who wants pictures of me and my dog? Who wants pictures of my daughter? Well, what happened about a year and a half ago with iCloud? They broke into it and they got about 20, they got millions and millions of pictures, and so anybody who took a naughty picture, they're out there. But they specifically dumped about 20 actresses who had different erotic photos in the iCloud, and they dumped them onto the internet. So is it paranoid to think that maybe I need to be careful with my information? There's a really weird tipping point with paranoid personality disorder. If you refuse to touch any technology because you're afraid somebody is going to steal your identity or take pictures of you and post it on the internet, that's probably a little bit further than that's probably getting into paranoid personality disorder. But to just keep yourself safe, I don't think that really is a personality disorder. I used to have a clip, and I don't know where it got to, but it was one of my favorite ones. It was just a short clip of Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec. Anybody watch Parks and Rec? Ron Swanson is very old school, doesn't like computers, doesn't like anything. He gets on the computer one day, and one of the people in the office tells him, go to Google Maps. And he goes into Google Maps, types in his own house, he pulls up a picture of his house. The next scene, you see him carrying an entire computer and throwing it in the trash. And that's just kind of the mentality. Very paranoid because he doesn't want anybody to know where he lives, what his name is, anything, his date of birth. But is it dysfunctional for him? Not really, because he's still living okay, and he's a fictional character, so it doesn't really matter. But what the problem is when you get into dysfunction, when it's an overriding paranoia about everything in your life. As soon as this switches over, you're going to see that right here, very low prevalence rate. And what's interesting is, throughout every single diagnosis that we've talked about previously, and some of the ones we haven't talked about, it's always been higher for females, right? It's a 2-to-1 ratio. When we get into these things like paranoid personality disorder, we see it way more in men than women. And there's not a good answer. I can't give you, like, this is the reason for that. The only thing that we can really kind of attribute is that these are not things that people walk into a clinic and seek out treatment for. Therefore, when there's a problem, it's going to manifest more in males because it's going to be a lot of times more overt. And so that might be why we see it more frequently. But this is not a disorder that happens a lot in everyday psychiatry and psychology. Okay, so next one is schizoid. So this is number 2 in cluster A of the odds. And these are people who, by their personality, so not by choice, not by happenstance, not because of nature or nurture, but just because of their own personality, they tend not to have very close friends. They're loners. They like to be by themselves. And when they are around people, they tend to be very egocentric, and they seem to be very dull to other people. These are people who don't give a rip about pop culture. They don't care about teams. They don't care about what you are doing and what your family's doing. They like being by themselves. They like being alone. And again, what's wrong with that? I mean, is there really anything wrong? If you want to be that way, is there anything wrong with that? Not really. But from an outsider's perspective, if you're this way, it can become a little bit problematic. A person that we can kind of use as an example, and I would never make this diagnosis based upon just not knowing this individual, but from representations and interviews, Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook dude, kind of schizoid. You know, just doesn't sometimes say the right things, doesn't really do well in public situations, seems to be very cold, seems, only cares about if you saw the Social Network, it was a good representation of him. He didn't care about, who he had to step on, which friends he had to dismiss, whether he had to lie to get what he wanted. He was just there for that one reason. Very few people would be categorized as schizoid. Less than 1% of the population. It's not a very common personality disorder. And it's not a very problematic one because most people who are loners or by themselves, guess what? They just don't come out. So you're not going to deal with them. You're not going to, there's not going to be a problem for other individuals. Schizotypal, on the other hand, is a little bit more, it's way more in-depth and it's way more problematic. This, instead of being a loner, these are people who have interpersonal problems where they struggle with relationships. And a lot of times it's very hard to figure out schizotypal versus schizophrenia. A lot of times it almost seems as though they might be delusional because they might have body dysmorphic issues. They may have ideas of reference, meaning that it's not a pure delusion, but an idea of reference is that everybody is talking about me, everything revolves around me. They tend to have very difficult times with relationships, but unlike schizoid, they actually seek out relationships. They're not, it's not that they don't want to be in a relationship, they just act weird when they get into relationships, okay? The archetype that I have for the schizotypal personality is I think probably everybody has had a high school or college professor, normally like a science teacher, just doesn't really care about what anybody thinks about them, don't really care about how they look, they're really geeked out on science, they're really geeked out on, they don't have really good interpersonal relationships, but they don't shy away from them. They're just kind of like, oh man, I don't want to be around that person. They're just kind of geeky weird. That's schizotypal. They act in a very bizarre way, and sometimes you're even like, man, is this guy kind of nuts? That's schizotypal. This one, again, a little bit more prevalent. You're looking at about 3 to 4% of the population has this at any given time. And again, mostly males. Slightly more, but mostly you're going to see this manifest in males way more than females. Okay? So that's our cluster A. They're not as interesting as the next group. And that is cluster B, which are the dramatic and emotional personality disorders. I'm going to start out with antisocial personality disorder. Again, this is the clinical term for somebody who would fit the idea of a psychopath or a sociopath. And there is a difference between those terms. A psychopath tends to not have any empathy. A sociopath tends not to follow society's rules, but in the end, they're both going to do very atrocious acts. The sociopath just doesn't care what society thinks about them, but they themselves may have some inner feelings about what they're doing. The psychopath, no empathy. Serial killers would be a psychopath because they see their victims as basically a toy for them to play with. Okay? So when we look at antisocial personality disorder, the first thing is this is one that you have to be 18. The other ones, it's recommended that you be 18, but the DSM says must be 18. And there has to be a history of issues in childhood. So we don't talk a lot in this class about childhood disorders, but the two major diagnoses that we will see in children that will manifest in antisocial personality disorder, the lesser of the two is oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD. The more common one, the one that we almost always see, is a disorder called conduct disorder. And conduct disorder is, for lack of a better term, or better explanation, it's an interaction, it's a frequent interaction in childhood with the criminal justice system without really caring about the fact that it's considered to be wrong. So it's the kids that get into trouble constantly, they're expelled from school all the time, and they just don't seem to care about it. And when we look at conduct disorder, there's a whole lot of nature versus nurture going on there. You know, if mom and dad don't care that you're getting expelled, then a lot of times kids aren't going to care. Now, if mom and dad do care, and you're still doing it, it just reiterates the fact that it probably is conduct disorder. So with antisocial personality disorder, you're almost always going to see conduct disorder either diagnosed or forensically, you can look back and say, this person did have conduct disorder, they just never got caught. And a lot of times, people with antisocial personality disorder, if you look back at their childhood, they were the kind of kids that got away with a lot. And people always assumed they were doing something, but they were good enough that they didn't get caught. Or they lived with, they had a good name or a good family, and so that kind of got them out of trouble. And so as adults, unfortunately, that doesn't work as well, and they have to kind of use their personality and their inner drive to get away with the same crap they were getting away with as kids. And so a lot of times you'll see them be just incredibly frequent liars. Not necessarily good liars, not necessarily bad liars, but they will lie for the sake of lying. They will lie about things that really don't benefit them at all. They'll lie about what they had for dinner the night before. They'll lie about the people that they hang out with. They'll lie about where they go on vacation. Not for any good reason, but just for the fact that they like to make up a narrative. They like to keep people guessing. They like to be in control of situations. And when you make up a story, when you make up your own reality, you're in complete control. Okay? So they might also be reckless and impulsive. Okay? They can also, not necessarily will they be, but they can be cruel, sadistic, aggressive, and violent. That's kind of a progressive thing. Cruel, sadistic, wanting to hurt other people and feeling good about it, aggressive, and then violent. Those are kind of the key components of many antisocial personality disorder people, but not all. They're not always going to be violent. Sometimes they're going to be very conniving, very unscrupulous, and they're going to do things that are going to benefit them and hurt other people. Scary statistic. Anywhere between 2 and 4% of people in the United States fit this category. And first off, we're not talking about all of them having antisocial personality disorder where they're going to be serial killers, but 2 to 4% of the population will step on your face in order to get ahead. Will lie without feeling bad about it to get ahead in work. Will sell you something that they know that you don't need in order for them to make a commission. There's a lot of jobs where having antisocial personality traits is a great benefit. Sales. Any commission sales, if you don't have an inkling of antisocial personality disorder, you are going to fail miserably. You just are. In probably the worst 6 months of my professional life, when I was an undergrad, I decided that I was going to make money by working at a car dealership, and I sold cars. And it was the worst 6 months of my life because, first off, I didn't enjoy the thrill of being in competition. Like, if I can get you to pay more for this car, I win. If you pay less, you win. My thought was, why would I want to make this person pay more? I'm going to make a little bit more. They're going to pay a lot more. That kind of sucks for them. I was young, kind of stupid, and I know that's the way of the world, but I just could not get my head wrapped around this. And my second to last day of working in this field, and it was a local dealership around here that's kind of known. If you remember back in the early to mid 2000s, Pontiac came out with a car. I probably still see them on the road today. Pontiac Vibe, kind of hatchbacky looking thing. It was, for some weird reason, it took off. Very popular. And I had a young lady, her very first car, she was like 22, came in, wanted this particular car, and it was the first time she ever bought a car. But at that first year, they came out with what I thought was the ugliest thing, and I never could figure out what the color was until Mountain Dew. It was this color. It was snot green. Best way I can describe it. She wanted this snot green Pontiac Vibe. We did not have one on the lot, so I was like, okay, well, I can find you one in a different lot. We'll bring it in. So we decided, we sat down, started working on the price, went back to my general manager, said this is what she's looking for. This is all the options she wants. He goes onto the locator. He finds the exact car she wants, and for simple numbers, I'm just going to say it was $18,000 sticker price. So we get the paper, and he writes down, she had no trade, no money down. She was financing it, and he wrote down the price, and he wrote down $19,000. It's like $18,000 sticker, $19,000. Doesn't work. It's like, yeah, I know. Car's not here. She doesn't know that. That gives you some room to negotiate. So if she comes back at 17, you meet him at 18, you just stickered her, and we make a good profit. Okay, I get it. So I go back out, and I put the paper down in front of her. I say, okay, so we found the car. It's awesome. It's great. You're going to love it. And it's $19,000. She's like, oh, great. Okay, fine. And signs it. It was that oh shit moment of, so I go back and I say, we have a problem. It's like, I just sold the car for more than what the sticker price is. And general manager looked at me like I was an idiot. It's like, what's the problem here? I said, well, when we get the car here, the sticker's going to be on it. She's going to see that. He's like, no, the sticker's not going to be on it. When we get it here, we're going to take the sticker off. We're going to clean it all up. We're going to put balloons on it. It's going to look awesome. And she's going to buy it for $19,000. This doesn't feel right. And so I kind of had to sleep on it. Next day, we delivered it to her. She paid $19,000. In the grand scheme of things, it cost her like an extra $17 a month. Did it kill her? I hope not. It didn't benefit me at all. I think I got like an extra $25 spiff for doing that. But that was my last day there. I just could not get my head wrapped around that. It just felt, it had the ick factor 5,000. Had I had more antisocial oomph to me, I would have been in the back bragging about this. I just got a girl to buy a puke green Vibe that nobody wants for $1,000 over sticker. I'd be giving high fives everywhere. Does that make me a good person or make another person a bad person? No. I mean, we need people who have that antisocial drive in order to make the world turn. And the flip side of that is, I met many antisocial people who, wanted to buy a car, and it was a sticker price of $20,000. They weren't going to pay any more than $13,000. It's like, dude, the tires and everything cost more than that, but they just would not budge. So everybody has that little bit of peace in them where all they care about is themselves. And there are some professions where it's going to work out really well for them. Unfortunately, when you get into the disorder, that's when you get into people who are sociopaths. Your Bernie Madoffs, your Ted Bundys, your Jeffrey Dahmers, your John Wayne Gacy's. People who will do something and have no empathy, have no feelings for the person that they're hurting. They just enjoy doing it. Serial killers don't kill because they need to. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but in most situations for killing, the person believes that they need to do it. Even in bizarre situations where it's a husband murdering a wife, wife murdering a husband, kids, whatever. There's that thought that this needs to be done. With a serial killer, with this antisocial personality disorder, it's not a need to, it's a want to. I want to go and kill somebody. So looking at antisocial kids, they start with conduct disorder, sometimes ADHD. The ADHD is not normally a cause of antisocial, but it helps with the conduct disorder. You have the impulsivity, you have the frontal lobe that's working way too fast, making poor decisions, and we see that antisocial personality comes from that much more frequently. Yes?
With the antisocial, once they're essentially thrown into a position where they have to be more talkative to people, is faster speech possible?
Possibly. I mean, I think that would be more of a personality trait that would go along with it. However, people with antisocial personality disorder do tend to try to run over people. They try to bully people into agreeing with them. And so a lot of times they'll start talking faster over the top of somebody else in order to just kind of squash it. And so talking faster could be an indication, but talking fast also is an indication of ADHD, which we know there's a correlation there, but it's not like everybody with ADHD is going to go kill everybody. Very small population. You're going to go kill them. So yeah, I mean, it's a possibility that there's a strong correlation there, but I'm just not sure. I haven't seen any research on that. Be a good thing to research. Okay, we move from antisocial to borderline. While I never want to run into an antisocial personality disorder individual on the streets because that's scary, borderline personality disorder are usually some of the hardest people to work with in a clinical setting. When I used to do more outpatient work, I had a pretty hard and fast rule that I would only work with one person with borderline at a time because they tend, when they're symptomatic, to take up a lot of your time. At one time, I had two at one time, and they both just ate away at me professionally, and they ate away at my kind of my inner psyche because they both were just all-encompassing. One of them was, I think I've described in this class, my guy who tried to shoplift at Lowe's, and yeah, okay, so he was one of them. He had borderline. My other was a young man, guy in his 40s who also had spent about 20 years in the same state hospital. Had gender identity disorder, had a very long history of sexual abuse as a child, had reactive attachment disorder, and had borderline personality disorder. And he would call, text, email on average about 35 times a day. And he was the definition of borderline. If he called me 30 times in a row, I would have 30 progressively hostile voicemails. Hey, Brad, can you give me a call? Hey, Brad, I only need to talk to you. By like the 10th one, damn it, Brad, why aren't you calling me back? 20th one, you suck. I know you hate me. Why won't you call me back? You're just the worst person in the world. By 25, I was fired. I got fired by him about four or five times a week. And the only thing I had to do, I still question myself why I did this, all I had to do was call him, and he would just, oh, thank you for calling me back. I know you're so busy. Thank you for calling. I just wanted to hear your voice. I needed to talk to you. I just needed to vent a little bit. I am so sorry that I left you all those mean messages. You didn't listen to those, do you? I hope you didn't feel bad about those. I thank you for taking time out of your day to call me. Am I not fired anymore? Oh, no. Heavens no, you're not tired. You're not fired. Freudian slip there. I was very tired. He was borderline to the extreme. Interpersonal relationships, unstable. Great example. He needed to talk to me. By the 30th voicemail, he had fired me. And then when I talked to him, I was the greatest person in the world. I know many of us have probably had relationships like that, but probably not to that extreme. In interpersonal relationships, the borderline person is the person who oftentimes is, will say things, and this is paraphrasing, but why won't you come over and talk to me? Why don't you ever call me? Why don't you ever spend time with me? Oh my God, why don't you leave me alone a little bit? You're just smothering me. Why don't you ever come over and talk to me? They're not happy unless you're giving them all your attention, and then the minute you give them the attention, you're smothering them. And that's the borderline mentality. A lot of this will sound like bipolar disorder, manic depression, and that's because this is personality or mood-based bipolar. It's bipolar of the person, not of the affect, not of clinical depression and clinical mania. This is a person who sways back and forth constantly. And a lot of times they're impulsive, a lot of times they get angry, a lot of times they say things that, in hindsight, they want to take back, and a lot of times they disregard what they say. Going back to my guy who called me, his notion was the minute that I call him back, those 35 messages didn't exist anymore because we were now talking, and all is forgiven, and we can just pretend like it didn't happen. It's like a very bad relationship where one party is verbally, maybe even physically aggressive, abusive, but the minute that the fight is over, they're over it. They're fine, and they expect the other person to just be fine as well. We don't need to talk about that. That happened yet. I hit you yesterday. Why can't you get over it? That's a borderline mentality. We see a lot of people with borderline also struggle with substance abuse, reckless behavior, self-mutilation, self-injury, suicidal threats, and actions. The more and more common behavior that we are seeing in adolescence of self-harm and self-mutilation stems back from borderline personality disorder. Cutting, burning, mutilation, where there is a emotional outlet that goes along with it. So if you just like getting your ears pierced or gauged or whatever, you like getting parts of your body pierced that you can never see, and you just like that because you think it's fashionable, it's not what we're talking about here. It's people who do it because the physical sensation that person has gives them an emotional outlet. Okay? We see things like cutting in people with borderline personality disorder, where, and some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may have first-hand, second-hand, third-hand experience, where, especially young ladies, but we're starting to see more and more guys do this, where they will, cut, and it's not necessarily about the cut, it's about the ritual. It's about
release. Isn't it about the release?
It's the release of pain. It usually starts, okay, so if we're talking about strictly borderline people, these are people who a lot of times don't have correlating emotions with correlating physiological responses. If I am sad, I feel sad. If I'm happy, I feel happy. A lot of times people with borderline don't have that. And so to have a synthesized experience, I take a razor and I cut myself, and it hurts because I cut myself, because I inflicted pain upon myself. And then I feel the blood kind of trickle down, and I know that blood came from the fact that I cut myself, and it's the byproduct of the pain. But when that is over, it's not over for the person who's ritualistically self-harming. The next step is, I'm now going to try to doctor this wound. And a lot of times you will see people with borderline, they have a very ritualistic way of doing this. They'll cut, and then they'll have a box of first aid things. They'll get iodine out, and they'll specifically do a very ritualistic way of covering it. They'll put a specific type of bandage over it. And a lot of times it's the whole ritual of, I don't know how to emote my pain. I don't know when I feel bad, when I feel depressed, I don't know how to get rid of that, but I know that if I cut myself, I'm going to get rid of that pain, and there's a very cause and effect relationship with that. Most people with borderline, very ritualistic with the way that they self-harm. Cutting is the most prominent. Burning would be the second most prominent. And if you see somebody who has been doing this ritualistically because of borderline, a lot of times they have very symmetrical patterns on their body. I worked with one young lady, been a long time ago. She was the first borderline person I ever worked with, and if she had on a t-shirt and shorts, not shorts today, this was like 10 years ago when shorts still came and covered up, like, you know, your butt, so they came to like here. But if you were to look at her walking around during the summer, you couldn't see anything. The minute she would roll up her sleeve at all, or if she would, if her short would come up at all, she would have perfect parallel cuts all up and down her body. Stomach, chest, arms, and she could recount what was going on for almost every one of those cuts. This is the time I got into a fight with my boyfriend. This is the time I got into a fight with my mom and dad. This is the time my grandma died. I have 3 of those. And she could say exactly what each of them were. She did not wear them as a sign of pride. And what we see today is that a lot of people actually don't cover up their cuts, and it's kind of a mystery in psychology and psychiatry as to why people, especially females, why they do this and why they used to cover it up, why it used to be something for them alone, and now we start to see people. You know, one of my favorite things to do on like a Sunday is to just go and people watch at like the mall. And 10 years ago, you would have not seen anybody with cuts, and now you can identify really quickly. You know, you just walk around the mall, you see people who have cuts up and down their arms, and you know, like, okay, that's somebody who's a self-harmer.
Now, for me, I've got borderline.
Mm-hmm.
It was sacred.
The ritual?
Yes, it was sacred and everything meant everything.
The whole process?
Yes, it still is sacred.
Mm-hmm. And so it's probably something you did in complete isolation? Yeah. And so one of the hardest things is to get somebody to actually open up about it, because
They diagnosed me first with bipolar.
with bipolar. Probably a psychiatrist or nurse practitioner did that. And that lines up perfectly with what we know, because a psychiatrist, and this doesn't mean they're wrong, they can't treat borderline. Borderline is a mystery to a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists, and again, this is an outsider speaking, kind of schizoid. They're not real good with interpersonal interactions a lot of the time. And what they do is they have to figure out, okay, what can I do to fix this person? And so if they see somebody who's manifesting all these symptoms, the only thing that might pop in their head is borderline, or I'm sorry, bipolar, and bipolar is something we can fix with mood stabilizers. Unfortunately, people with borderline personality disorder tend to have relatively stable moods. They appear to the outside world to be unstable, but they themselves are relatively stable. And so to put them on mood stabilizers is basically to lock them in to those rituals. And I don't know if you if you were put on mood stabilizers, did it put you more into the rituals, or did it help?
No, it didn't help at all.
For the most part,
the doctor knows and said it's not helping. There's something.
Yeah, because it's going to take you or anybody with you know, bipolar is people who go from here to here, big cycles. Okay, borderline people tend to be right here. So you give them a mood stabilizer, the bipolar person is going to shoot, come back down to here. The borderline person is going to get a mood stabilizer, and it's going to sink them right around that tight little ball of borderline, and it's going to make you kind of focus in on exactly what it is that you have been doing to help yourself. Counterproductive. Not for nothing. But this is one where psychiatrists tend to get it wrong. And it's not because they're getting it wrong because they're stupid. They're getting it wrong because if they were to go with this first, there's nothing they could really do. They can refer out. And then if they're wrong that way, then they're just going to get referred back. Because if a psychiatrist were to say, okay, you need to go see Brad because this is out of my realm. I think this might be borderline. Person comes to me, we talk for 6 months, doesn't do any good. Send him back to the psychiatrist. Let's try some bipolar treatment, and the bipolar stuff works. Well, that makes everybody look a little stupid. Whereas sometimes it's easier to start with bipolar because if that doesn't work, then we can fall back on borderline. But this whole notion of self-medication, self-healing, trying to regulate something that isn't intrinsically regulated is something that the people who are outside of that bubble will never understand. And this is probably one of those things that working with parents, especially working with kids, parents hardly ever get this, especially in Indiana. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of parents in Indiana, kind of curmudgeonly, rural people, and they just don't get this. Well, why would you, if you are hurting inside, why would you cut yourself? That makes no logical sense. And yeah, it makes no logical sense, but it works on some level. It's the same thing as my dad. Again, I think I told most. My dad was a farmer. He's still a farmer. He's a farmer till the day he dies. He would be working on a tractor and start calling it names because it wouldn't work. I've never, in all my life, seen him start screaming and using strings of profanity that would make anybody blush, and the tractor just kicks on. Like, dude, stop yelling at me. And it doesn't work, but he kind of, in his mind, that helps him out. But if I were to try to get him to kind of to get into this, he's like, no, why? Why? If you're hurting, if you're emotional, why would you cut yourself? Why would you hurt yourself? That just makes no sense. That's stupid. And dismiss it. Same way I look at him and say, the tractor's not going to turn on just because you called it a mother effer. But he feels better. So if I can get that, we just can't get him to cross the bridge. Just like, you feel better because you called the tractor JC, son of a B, and now you feel better. This person over here feels something on the inside, cuts themselves, feels better. These two things match. Can't get there. So borderline, very, very all-encompassing type of disorder. Very, yeah.
I have a question. I don't know how it relates to this, but I've had a couple patients that come into the hospital that, usual suicide thoughts. And I looked at her arm because obviously if they could suicide, we have to sort of down and yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
But she had red marks on her arm, and I was like, did you recently cut? Well, she goes, no. I looked at it closer. She goes, my therapist told me to write markers on.
Mm-hmm.
How does that help them in that situation?
There's two.
Because they're trying to really pain drawing. It's not.
There's two. The pin one is one that I have prescribed to people who don't necessarily need the pain; they need the ritual. Okay. Now, the one that I have found, and I didn't make this up. I don't remember where I got it, but to me, this was brilliant. I would oftentimes prescribe for people who were this isn't the first thing. I wouldn't, the first day of treatment, I would say, okay, try this, because I'm taking away the ritual. That would suck. It wouldn't work. But after they've been working for a while and they realize that what they're doing is counterproductive, I would tell them to go home, buy an old school ice cube tray, and fill it with red Gatorade. And then when you feel like you want to cut, take an ice cube out and cut with it. Because what's going to happen is the ice cube on your skin, mimicking a cut, is going to feel very similar to an actual cut. It's going to hurt. And as that Gatorade melts, it's going to have the same effect as blood going down your arm. The visual, use red, don't use grape because it's not going to work. You've got what looks like blood, and then you go through the process of cleaning it up. And there is a little bit of doctoring you have to do. If you sit there and you slowly use an ice cube over and over, you're going to have a little bit of almost frostbite from that. And so you do have to doctor it a little bit. And so the procedure is there. The pain is there. The cleaning up is there. The ritual is there. This is a replacement behavior. It is not. I've never heard of any research to say that somebody just one day decided, I'm going to try ice cubes instead of cutting. I mean, and it just, boom, it worked. Usually it has to be part of a very specific treatment plan where you're using a behavioral intervention, and this is one where I'm not going to take away the ritual from you, but I'm going to take away the pieces that will harm you.
Okay.
Similar, but not the same as methadone. You know, if you give somebody methadone, you're giving them a drug, you're giving them a ritual of going and finding the drug and using the drug, and you have certain physiological responses, but it's going to block the nasty stuff from happening. Kind of similar to that. Is it perfect? No. Is it a step better? Maybe. But for some people, it just won't work. Just like methadone won't work because they'll still shoot up heroin even though it won't have the physiological effect. They'll still shoot up heroin with methadone. Some people will still need to cut, still need to do whatever. So, yeah, probably, unfortunately, if you're seeing somebody and you're doing a suicide check on them and they have those marks on them like from a pin, you can probably bet that that's not working as a treatment.
Yeah.
Just a guess. And so one way to kind of ingrain yourself in their good graces is to just say, well, looks like that's not working. We might want to try something else, because they're probably thinking the exact same things. Like, these stupid marks on my arm just didn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, that tends to kind of go along with it. Now, really quickly, I haven't talked a lot about treatments because there isn't a lot of treatments for personality disorders, but there is one for borderline. It's called dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. DBT takes a special kind of therapist. If I were going to go back and do strictly therapy full-time, doing that only, I think I would get myself into at least half-time DBT because it looks like so much fun. And that's kind of the masochistic, sadistic side of me, because DBT is all about cut and dry fact. No, we're not going to buy into the emotion. We're not going to buy into anything. Everything is factual. Everything is on the up and up. You are very straightforward with individuals. And I saw DBT for the first time. I was working at a psychiatric hospital, and there was a DBT clinician there because they had a unit of borderline teenagers. If you ever think you have a bad job, consider that there is a unit of borderline teenage girls somewhere in the world. It's horrendous. But she did this, and her job was to work with those 10 girls, but also 2 years aftercare for anybody who was released. So she had people all the time. Part of DBT is setting up a contract of what will happen when certain things happen. And one of the biggest things that happens with people with borderline is they will oftentimes have suicidal ideations or claim that they have suicidal ideations. And so I was sitting in Stephanie's office one day and the phone rings, and she picks it up and it's a client. You can tell it was a client, and she said, "Oh, okay, so do you have a plan? Okay, call me back when you have a plan." Hung up. I was like, what just happened here? Oh, one of my old clients called and said you're going to kill yourself. Really? Yeah. The whole part of DBT is you don't call me until you are ready to kill yourself, because I'm not going to play the game of I'm thinking about killing myself, I really need some emotional support. We're past that. So about 15 minutes later, phone rings again. Oh, okay, so you have a plan now? Great. Okay. Okay, do you have a gun? Okay, call me when you get the gun. And literally, this went on for like 3 phone calls until the very end. And at the very end, she was like, "Do you have bullets? Like, do you have bullets? Do you know what's going to happen when this happens?" And the final one was, "You do realize that if you say what you're about to say, you know my action is that I'm going to call 911 and hang up on you. I'm going to hang up you and then call 911." And that's when you could tell that the person on the other side of the phone kind of backed off. Okay, so you don't want me to call 911, so you're going to stop calling me about this, and we'll talk on Thursday when you come in for your outpatient session. And that's DBT. Incredibly straightforward. Scary as crap to me. So I'm sitting here going, oh, God, I don't...
She actually would have done it, though.
If she would have done it, they have a DBT clinicians have very strict client-patient contracts stating that these are the things that I'm going to do. and it's prescribed out that if you call, the girl that was calling knew that this was going to be the procedure. That she knew, because they don't leave, they don't get out of this program. It's like a 10-month program. They don't get out without knowing and having it drilled into their head that you're not going to call the clinician and cry wolf. If you do, I'm going to call you on it. And that's basically the only way you can call somebody on it. You can't say, oh, you're not going to do it, because then you're going to get into power struggle. The only way you can call them on it is say, okay, call me when, call me right before you jump, or before you take the pill or whatever. Again, that was so unnerving to listen to that. But she was just so calm and just straightforward about it, because she's like, oh yeah, I get like 4 or 5 of those a day. And come to find out, even one of the calls in the middle wasn't even the same girl that had been calling before. It was a completely different one, and I thought it was just in line with. So there were 2 former clients who were threatening suicide at one time. Very interesting stuff. Primarily, you basically just being straightforward and setting boundaries and setting the fact that these are the stipulations for a interpersonal relationship, and we're not going to violate that. That's the borderline treatment with dialectical behavioral therapy. The kissing cousin to borderline is histrionic. And histrionic are individuals who are extremely emotional, and they want to be the center of attention. Okay? These are individuals, drama kings, drama queens, manipulators, puppeteers. Histrionic people are the kind of people who will come over in a social event and they'll say, oh, hey, how you doing? Yeah, did you see those people sitting over there? Can you believe she's wearing a blue sweatshirt? Isn't that ugly? And then you'll say, yeah, look, did you hear her? She was talking about a blue sweatshirt? She's wearing red. Yeah, red sweatshirt. And then you say, yeah, I know, red. She's talking about your red shirt. And then as soon as they figure out they've got people going, they step back and they watch it, and they'll revel in the fact of what they've created, but then to be the center of attention, because I am the person who created this, and I am the ally of both people, I can now step in, because I know everything that happened, and I can say, guys, this is silly. You're talking about shirt colors. You guys have known each other for a very long time. Let's just calm down. Let's all just, how about you just talk to me, and I'll talk to you, and maybe you guys can talk later, but, just focus on me for a little bit. And all of a sudden, I get approval. I get, wow, you are amazing at getting people to get along. Like if you were around during the Civil War, we wouldn't have ever had a Civil War. It just would have been, they would have got together and said, this is silly. And so these people just revel in the fact that they're producing a world in which they are the master manipulator. If they cannot get attention in that way, if they're not as good with verbal manipulation, a lot of times you'll see histrionic people be hypersexual. If I can't get attention by talking to you, I will, lack of a better term, kind of slut it up, and I'll get my attention that way. And this is not to say that all sexual people are histrionic. It's to say that people who are histrionic use sex as a weapon, as a tool to get your attention. And so a lot of times they will be very flirtatious and get somebody expecting that there's some interest, some sexual interest, and when that other person starts to reciprocate, like, whoa, 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 just because I was talking to you doesn't mean that I was really interested in you. God, you must really be into me. I'm going to go over here and talk to this other person, and then start pulling. Can you believe that she was hitting on me the whole time? I can't believe that. It's like, why are you talking to me? You're hitting on me now. I'm going to go back over here and get this person over here. And like all of a sudden, I like have all these people hitting on me in my mind. And if it doesn't work, then I'm going to have to up the ante. Much like the borderline person who can't get somebody's attention might up the ante. Like, I'm going to kill myself. Okay, so do you have a gun? No, I don't have a gun. So they go get the gun. They keep upping the ante. With this one, eventually, if they can't get the attention, pretty soon they will just start engaging in hypersexual activity, and that will be their means of getting attention. 2 to 3% of the population, primarily females, although we are seeing more and more males with histrionic. And again, I don't want to get into this in abnormal psych because this is a discussion for human sexuality. But when I say that we're seeing more males in the category of histrionic, I'm using the sexual term, not using gender, because a lot of the shift is sex-based males, gender-fluid individuals tend to become more histrionic. We see a very high prevalence rate in transgender individuals. And that's not a real popular thing to say around, or that transgenders don't like hearing that, because they don't see it as a personality quirk or personality disorder. They see it as part of their personality. But what they would consider cisgendered individuals look at transgender people and say, you are acting the way that a cisgender person who's histrionic would act. And so we get into this really muddy situation of what is normal for one group is not necessarily normal for another. So histrionic, tons of drama, loves to set up the situation so that there will be drama. Finally, narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder, people believe that they're the greatest. They tend to exaggerate how great they are. They tend to, if they're in a group that is successful, they will take ownership of almost everything that happened in that group. If it's a failure because the rest of the group failed. They failed despite the fact that they had the greatest group member ever with them. Okay, they need admiration, but the tricky thing with a person with narcissistic personality disorder is that oftentimes, if they don't get admiration from somebody, they automatically dismiss that person as not being correct. So if you're doing the professor reviews, and I pick them all up and I look at them and I say, look at that, like 8 of you wrote that I was, a 5 out of 5, and all 5s perfect, and then I see one's like, somebody gave me a 2. Well, that idiot just wasn't paying attention, and I throw it away. If I were narcissistic, that would make sense to me, because you must have been the person, you weren't getting me, you weren't paying attention, you obviously had something wrong with yourself, I'm just going to dismiss that. But the 5s, of course, of course I got all 5s. So that's the idea, that I need admiration, and even if I'm not getting it, it's because you're wrong. And again, I hate to throw politics into this, but you look at somebody like Trump, and Trump is, without a doubt, a narcissist. And the way that we can kind of identify that is he puts himself in situations where he can be surrounded by people who absolutely loathe him, disagree with him, shouting at him, and he's in his element because he's looking at them and saying, you are the people who are the problem with this country. I'm trying to solve it. You guys are just yelling and screaming because you're idiots and you don't understand how great I truly am. Is that a bad thing? If in that type of situation, we need a leader. Leaders need to be somewhat narcissistic because they need to believe that they can lead. Comes a point where it's a little counterproductive when you don't listen to anybody who tells you that you're possibly doing something slightly wrong. So narcissist, well beyond 75%. That's just a very kind number. It's rare to find females who have narcissistic personality disorder. And again, most of them, we talk about sex females, but if we were looking at their gender, if we were to use some kind of like modified Kinsey scale, females with narcissistic personality disorder would be identified more as gender male, what we consider to be in the Western civilization as gendered male. So it's very uncommon for females to have narcissistic personality disorder. And again, that kind of harkens back to the fact that some people will argue that males will be identified as narcissistic, females will be identified as histrionic. And that's because 90% of the people that go to the Caribbean to write the DSM are males. Freudian. They don't admit to being Freudian, but they're Freudian. Okay. Don't need to go through, again, it'll catch up here in a second. The last 3, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because they're pretty straightforward. They're the anxious disorders. They're avoidant, dependent, and OCPD. Okay? Avoidant and dependent personality disorders are exactly like what you would think they are. The dependent personality disorder is somebody who needs to, whose identity is strapped to someone or someone's or something else. Without their counterpart, they are not a whole person. The avoidant personality disorder is very similar to the schizoid personality disorder, in that they don't feel a need to be around people. It's not that they are awkward, they just feel like, I'm okay by myself. So those are relatively simple. And then OCPD, again, this is what most people who think they're OCD actually are. OCPD are people who need order in order to feel comfortable. If there's no order, if there's no level of, if the world is chaos, if you can't control what's going on in your world, you're going to feel off. And so your personality is such that you want to be completely in control. And if you're not in control, you have the anxiety. So the compulsion is, the more I grab my life by the horns and just, I control it, right? Hold the reins and nobody else can control what I do, it will make it so that I'm not so anxious about being in this world. And so my obsession is, I want to be in control. The compulsion is, darn it, I'm going to be in control. Usually these manifest. OCPD is probably one of the very most common personality disorders where people will actually seek out outpatient or inpatient treatment because 2 life events brings OCPD out. Getting married, having a child. Nothing like having a child to really tell you, if you have OCPD, that you are not in control of your own life. Something that is 8 pounds and has very little brain activity going on controls every aspect of your life. And if you believe that you're going to control it, you've got another thing coming. Every time you think you have control of your child, they turn into another age category that shows you that they're in control. My daughter is 6. I thought, after like 5 or, after about 4 or 5, we're going to be able to sit down and chat. It's going to be cool. It's like, no, now she's hit, this back talking, and eventually she's going to hit puberty, and that's when she gets locked in the box. But I know that, if I want to control anything, the more I try to control, the less control I'm actually going to have. So most people have a quirk towards OCPD. Anybody who would be completely anti-OCPD would be just like those floater type people that just kind of just go along with life and like, whatever's going on will go on. Most people have a small tendency because they like to control their own life, but OCPD is when it becomes a little bit problematic and there's a chaos or there's an issue with the person as they're living. Okay? So those are our 10 disorders. As you sit here, how many of you feel like you now need to go see someone because you have a few? You don't have to raise your hand, but you got a few under your belt now? Anybody identify some friends, family, siblings? More people nod their head to that one, always. It's like, yeah, I had, my ex, like 7 of them up there. We tend to be very good at identifying other people because we're not real awesome at being self-aware, but I'm guessing that if I were to just make your final exam, name a person in your life that has each of these, the only one that I hope you struggle with is antisocial. I hope that you're like sitting there, I'm hoping that's not the first one you go, just like, dude, I know this person's killing people. And I hope you don't write your own name down for that. But you start to see these things, but again, you have to remember, is it dysfunctional? Is it really problematic? Okay? Questions about any personality disorders?
Are you going to post this on Blackboard?
I will post it before I leave, so you can take a look at it. Yep. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?
Have a good night.
That's my line.
Oh.
See, now at OCPD, I'm not in control. I'm going to have to hold you here for another hour because the door is obviously locked from the inside, right? You can't get out. Okay, so even though I don't have control over you anymore, you're giving me the social cues that you want to leave. So on Thursday, we'll either do mood or schizophrenia. We'll probably do schizophrenia. because schizophrenia, after doing personality disorders, actually seems more normal. Normally, I do schizophrenia first, then personality disorders, and feel like personality disorders aren't that weird. Schizophrenia is going to be relatively easy because I've talked about it quite a bit throughout the semester, and it's going to fit into steps beyond this. So you've already got your kind of your bar set. Now we're just going to take that bar one step higher and say, okay, these are people who just really aren't in touch with reality. So we'll hit on that, and I'll get exam number 3 posted up sometime onto Blackboard. I'll send you an email when that happens, and that is it.
How long is the exam going to be up for?
Long. Oh, how long is it going to be up for? It'll be up until the end.
Can I ask how long?
Yeah.
7 questions?
I'm voting for 5.
Now I must triple.
Example.
Yeah, but I have to write 21 questions. That sucks. I'll see if I can find a test bank.
Alright.
Yeah, it won't be. It'll be up until the end of the semester.
Sweet.
Okay.
Example of the term paper.
Example of the term paper. I found one. I just need to post it. Thank you. Get it up there. Yep. I'll get it up there. And I'll post this up too.
I'm leaving for Florida next Thursday,
Okay.
and I don't know how I can do it on the computer, or I can take it with me.
When at the beginning of class when I was talking about the fact that it's probably going to be, I'm really super leaving there. Because I have a conference in Denver, and I'm presenting at 9:30 on Saturday, so I would like to leave Thursday night, but that's your final. So I think my compromise is going to be I'm going to give it to you online. We don't have to meet that way, and I can get some sleep that night. So I think that's the way I'm going to go. Either way, if somebody can't make it, obviously I'll put an alternative online. So basically, I think you just bought everybody an online one. So I want to be fair to everybody, so we'll make it online.
Okay.
So I'll put it up there.
I'll tell you.
So everybody can thank you. Just make sure you get cash.